institutions, universities, NGOs, private companies, and producer organizations. Also, he has collaborated with CIRAD for 7 years. His present goal is to contribute to the reinforcement of family farming in Latin America through the co-production of knowledge and approaches, the co-generation and participatory dissemination of innovations at the local, national, and international levels, as well as through the strengthening of capacities and the linking of key actors in research and development. Thank you so much. Yes.
Buenas tardes. The first question is, should I speak in English or in Spanish or in French, even if you prefer?
French.
No, let me.
Not French.
French is out of the picture. So, Spanish or English?
English.
Is it English?
No.
It will be better. So I will ask you for forgiveness first because of my French accent, and second because I don't speak English most of the time. I speak only Spanish, so my English might come a bit. And the slide will be a mixture of Spanish and English, so hopefully we will manage. First thing is, this is not really a formal talk, it's more a conversation with a few bits and pieces that hopefully will, I would say, allow us to have some discussion if I am not too long, because I have a tendency to be too long. The title is a bit complex, and after I had sent it, I wondered if I could cover it. So, there are a few ideas, no? The idea of change and making change happen, the idea of local actors and their role in innovation, and of course the idea of maybe not just giving a talk, but seeing if there are any ways we could collaborate in some kind of short-term or medium-term future. So I will start, maybe just for the sake of history. I gave a seminar here in August 2003 when I was leaving CIRAD. So that was 15 years ago. And I won't tell you the last person who had the last word in my seminar, because that would be a story by itself. But it was on conservation agriculture in the Bajío. Yeah, it was Ken Saya. And if you know this, do you know what he said? After, if you give me some tequila, I will let you know. So we will talk a little bit about achieving change, about local innovation, and strengthening the role of these actors, capacity to innovate, and Latino, which is the point about collaboration in the future. I hope you all know CIRAD. Hopefully most of you know CIRAD. If you don't know, you can come and I comment to you, but it's a center that works based in France. It's not an international center, but it works with a mandate very close to a number of international centers, except that it doesn't have a crop mandate, but it works on anything from genes to society and social aspects policy around the tropics mostly. So my key messages, if you want to leave, it will be short. Can we get rid of this? Can I do something? With the mouse? It will go away?
You might reboot your computer.
I didn't have my glasses on, so I just said okay. So it will stop? Okay. Sorry. You see, you knew better than I did. Okay. Okay, anyway, the key message is, first is change. There are many ways we can achieve change. Everyone know this.
No.
It's usually involve, and if I use the concept of impact pathways, rather complex impact pathways over lengthy periods. So usually when we talk about impact, it's mostly 15, 20, 30 years down the road, not 5 years projects. And it requires research to play many multiple roles to be able to get to this impact. So if we start with research, we will see this. The second thing is, there is a lot of innovation that is done by local actors. There are farmers, but there are many other local actors. Usually it is under the radar. Not many people know about it, or not many people try to know about it. And I think research and other public agricultural research for development actors should build on these dynamics rather than ignore it, or sometimes even, I would say, menospreciar. Third message is about, well, you need to strengthen the capacity to innovate and leadership of local actors if you want to have sustained impact and development at scale. And I had a conversation with this morning that at scale can be a complex topic by itself. And if you want local leadership in these processes, you need significant investment to have it. It's not something that is a given. And the last message is, we are eager, even if it took me 2 years to come here, to partner with CIMIT. We have an initiative we call Latino that I will present very briefly, and hopefully some of you at CIMIT might be interested in joining. So achieving change, the first topic. Usually many people have a relatively simple view of an innovation process. You can call it linear, but it's more than linear, it's simple. You start, you arrive there and things are fine. This is closer to what it can look like, which is you start somewhere, you might actually end up there, or you might end up somewhere different, or you might end up where my mistake was, which is nowhere. So that's a simple way of talking about innovation as a complex, unpredictable, difficult to plan process. Impact pathway, I don't know at CIMIT how much you use it as a concept, but it's a simple way of trying to trace back where the impact came from by going from impact to outcome, to output, to inputs, and trying to find causality links between these different boxes, to put it that way. Now, this very generic looks in fact very simple. You have things moving, and it's not, we have actually put an article out where there is a lot of feedback loops and things that happen, but if you try to trace it in a real project that was Highland rain-fed rice in Madagascar, things look much more complex than this simple alignment of boxes. You don't have to read them, by the way. The stars, the yellow stars, show you something that we in CIRAD have put a lot of emphasis, which is the learning situation and all the capacity building that takes place along the way of the impact pathways. And you can also, do I have a pointer here somewhere? No? Yeah? I don't want to press any button now without glasses. This one? And I have my glasses on, so can I press again? Yes, that's good. This one? Yeah. The red things are negative impacts, which obviously research didn't plan for, but they did happen as you look at the impact. So it's not just the positive impact that research is striving to achieve that is put here on the table. All the impacts that the actors somehow, when you talk to them, mention that this happens as a result of some of the process that took place. So just as an idea of complexity, and we have done a number of case studies on different types of technologies, different types of innovation processes in different contexts. All of them have their own specific impact pathway, but the main idea is this. It's complex, it has unexpected, positive, negative, it has a lot of place for learning, it has a lot of things happening in many different dimensions. I don't know if some of you are familiar with the work of Borrow-Dowthwaite, who said that maybe if you want to have an idea of overarching pathway, there are 3 ways research can contribute to impact. It can either go into technology development and adoption, it can go into the capacity development pathway, or it can go into the policy influence pathways. So it's a very simple way of saying, and usually these things interact with each other, which is you don't go in one and you forget about the others. You maybe go preferentially in one, and then you have others coming depending at the moment of the process. You go into these loops and in this interaction between the different pathways. Now, when you look, if you want to go a little, how to say, more in detail about not just the 3 main pathways, but how can research engage in innovation, which by itself will go to impact. When we look at some of the work we conducted over the last 30 years, we see 4 ways we can engage in innovation. First is transfer of knowledge and technology, which pretty much match the first pathway of Darthwaite, and we can call it participatory. It can be more or less participatory. Because you have a solution that you have developed as researchers over time, and you bring it to people. And you make it happen in many different ways by making it fit the context. Another pathway that is maybe more working multi-actor with stakeholders, what we call the co-construction of innovation, or co-design. There are many different vocabularies you can use here, where you really discuss more, you negotiate more, and you achieve something where the knowledge we bring as researcher, or the solutions or the proposals are negotiated and possibly enriched or possibly modified quite a lot, and the knowledge can also come from the other actors as well. Another model that we see emerging is that actually the process is much more controlled by the actors themselves, and research comes as a support to what the actors try to do. So they have the agenda, they have maybe the goal, they have some of the knowledge, they ask you to bring your knowledge to support them. And the last model is open innovation, where you have, which is becoming more and more common in many different industry models. So when we looked at our research, say the typology of things we can do, more or less revolves around these 4 different models. Of course, you can have hybrids. You can have some steps where you are more into one mode, or some types of technology where you are more into one mode, some types of innovation where you are more into another mode, and because the process can take several decades, obviously you can have evolution as you learn from the first steps and you try to adjust, or the type of innovation you look at differ from the beginning towards the end of the process. Something we have seen is, of course, the idea of multiple roles played by research. Of course, we keep being producers of knowledge, of skills, of technology. That is a main role, that is the typical classical role that I think we learn when we are at school. We also work a lot on the idea of co-design of innovation, which is different from just producing knowledge on our own. We work a lot on supporting the actors and promoting the innovation. You can see some of the contents in each of the main functions. The major function is about capacity building as such, and all the idea of resource management, which, as we know, especially because of the short cycle of project, making sure that you can go from one project to another and giving continuity to some of the work becomes a major function of research. Now, not necessarily the same researcher will play all the functions, not necessarily all the functions have to be played at every step of the process, but all in all we have to see this diversity as a requirement for research to be an effective partner in innovation. And when I say effective partner, it means that we are not the only ones who may play these roles also. So some of these things can be shared with different actors. I thought I had another slide, but it's probably hidden that I wanted to share. It's okay. So, any comments you want to make on this first part? Or you want to have a general discussion at the end? We wait? I wait as well. Okay. So second part of what I wanted to share with you about local innovation, some ideas, local actors and their leadership. What are we talking about? It's not necessarily clear. Many people say, well, it's basically innovation developed by farmers on their own. So I try to put a definition. I have been working on this paper forever, and it's basically a set of formal, informal activities farmers and other stakeholders conduct and lead, with or without external support. So it's not exclusive of intervention by people from outside. Why they do it? To improve their livelihood and condition. They do it through better production, management, processing, marketing, organization, among others. It's a working definition. Some people, and actually that's how this part was started, say it might be a special case of what we call frugal innovation. I don't know how much this concept is shared here. But basically it's innovation for the bottom of the pyramid. It's all this idea that all these sophisticated products that the Western industry keeps pushing onto consumer might not be necessarily the only way of looking at innovation, and might not be the way to reach the poorer members of society. A case here that CIMIT knows about because it was the work done by Daniel Bockholz and Gustavo Sain and myself so many years ago, Mucuna maize system in northern Honduras. I don't want to describe the innovation, but it's basically an agroecological system where you have a rotation between a Mucuna crop that is mostly an improved fallow and the maize production on hillsides. It's an innovation that was widely adopted first in northern Honduras in the late 80s, early 90s, and then it was a system that allowed to have very profitable maize production and very sustainable on steep slopes with very little labor, and it was very good. That was where I did my PhD thesis, very good for soil fertility. It had some economic problems, by the way. It declined steeply, but it's also a system that was widely diffused, disseminated in Central America, that also made some progress especially in West Africa. So it's a local innovation by farmer that actually went to scale in its region of origin and also in many different places, with adaptations, with problems, with difficulties, whatever you can have when you take an innovation out of its context where it emerged and could make. By the way, this is one of the main innovators, Don Chema, who I happened to contact because of France that won the World Cup. They contacted me from the US where the family is living. See? That was a month ago. I was very happy to find him again. Another type of local innovation, soybean in Benin. It was introduced by NGOs as a baby food in a way to fight against infant mortality. It's a woman crop. It was cultivated just for home consumption and for the need of families. Became a small industry, but then this thing took a life of its own. It became small-scale women as the, processors started making food out of soybean, and it became a food that became a substitute for food that was too pricey for a lot of low-income consumers. So they started replacing fish, meat, milk-based produce in urban and rural areas as well. And then it has become an interesting, so you started having production by farmers to supply the women. You can now find this product almost everywhere. And you also had the crisis of the cotton oil industry. So your soybean started also becoming used as a substitute for cottonseed in the oil industry. And it has now become also produced for feeding poultry raising. And there are a lot of innovation happening without any structured input by formal research and development organization. But a lot of the innovation happened with the small-scale women entrepreneurs in Benin over more or less 15 to 20 years. So here you can see a process where the start of the process, there was an external intervention, and you had a lot of interaction with different types of actors, mainly from the, from the private sector. But it's a very different process, but it's still, we still call it a local innovation, or part of it local innovation. Now, local innovation, it has limitations, it has challenges. When we look in many different settings, what kind of innovation is tackled by local innovation, you have a lot of technical innovation indeed, much more than institutional or organizational. And you have a lot of these innovations are minor adaptation to existing practice to fit the context of the innovator, or they are adaptation of introduced technology. So it doesn't mean local, doesn't mean endogenous innovation without taking on board what is introduced from outside. Another question is actually who actually innovates. Is it something that many people can do? Some people argue that only a small fraction of people, of local actors, are actually innovators. Many of them are not. And who can benefit from it? Is it really just the innovator and his or her family, or is it something that can actually be adopted, or at least adapted by others? It's a question that is not necessarily easy to answer. The question of scaling, we have the bigger expert here, so I left it on the slide. I didn't change it, despite of what you say, but can it be disseminated outside of the context where it emerged and has been used? It's a question. The other question is, what should be replicated? Is it the innovation itself is a mistake, or the process by which people can actually do local innovation or enter into local innovation? And the question of the role of us, the public institutions, to favor or even sometimes to limit dissemination, because not all innovations that are local are necessarily good in terms of the sustainability criteria or some of the things they try to promote. And the question obviously on, is local innovation, is it just something, a fashion for romantic researchers, or is it something that can actually contribute to solving bigger global development challenges, some of the SDGs? So these are questions that are attached to local innovation, and I think the formal research community would have a tendency to be more skeptical than enthusiastic about local innovation. Now, the question of leadership. The first question is like local innovation. There are indeed a lot of local leaders out there. Some of them may be potential leaders, some of them already leaders. They do exist, they come in many different profiles. You can find technical leaders, you can find value-driven leaders or community, you can find political leaders. Obviously, I mean, it's like the real work. They need to be identified and nurtured if we think these are people we want to work with. Sometimes they self-identify themselves to us because they come when we look for partners, sometimes they don't. They have a key role for not only as individuals for building their own institutions. Farmers' organization is one example, but it's you can have leadership in different kind of institutions at the local or territorial level. Now, when we work with leaders, or when we would like to work with leaders for our own purposes, it's not necessarily that leaders will share our vision of the change we want. We want change for, Bram is here for conservation agriculture. You can find leaders who have another agenda than our technical agenda. And there are many different competing models for change. So you can find people who are very good at being leaders, but the change they want is not necessarily, say, agroecological future for their territory. They might have other ideas in mind. The question of representativity, we all, I think, struggle to find leaders that are representative of the bigger group they are supposed to come from, or the issue of cooptation of local leaders by external intervention, which is a big issue. Because we say, yes, we work with them, but they are leaders who have somehow lost maybe their representativity. And a big issue we face over and over is regenerating leadership over time, which is you find a good person, 20 years later, this person is still in the same organization, is still the one that occupies all the space. Can you find this way of making sure leadership keep changing from person to person or from generation to generation? So a few points. Now the last point is, can we do something as a public institution with local innovation? So we have doubts, we are skeptical, we don't like them, they compete with us for visibility maybe. Some of us might feel threatened by it. The point is there is very little research on local innovation. There is actually a small project that was trying to document the impact of local innovation with MIT and people from Innova and from myself a little bit. So it is not something that has been done much by us to look at these things. The first thing is documentation and diagnosis. What are these local innovation in their different dimensions, in their diversity, where are they coming from, what they have contributed. what they might contribute in the future. In many different dimensions, you can look at them from the technical point of view, from the capacity building, from the political, from the cultural value. There is a lot of local innovation that is about fighting for keeping, say, some of the practices, some of the values that were part of the campesino agriculture. Of course, you may fall into angelism, that small is beautiful, or what's small for, and some of us, I see now, maybe I am myself a bit in this category. But that's the first component. The second one is you can not only document it, but you can try to strengthen and accompany local innovation. Trying to accelerate the pace, optimize the type of innovation, the question of hybridization of knowledge, trying to, the issue of, I left scaling up, but the issue of scaling, the issue of systematizing, the issue of the design, this dissemination, without losing its aims and content. Because the risk is obviously you overpower local innovators with your own way of doing things, and then it stops being local innovators. And the idea of innovation capacity of local actors, that I will tackle a little more now. That's my last point before collaboration. How much time do I still have before we have a general discussion? 5 minutes? No, but I would like a discussion. I'm sure some of you will not be happy with some of the things I said. So, we know to innovate we need different types of capacities. A lot of us, we of course know we need technical capacity, various types. Some people know we need financial capacity, and then there is a third group that I will present a little bit, the functional capacities or soft skills. Actually, a lot of us, what we do, we are here. Type 1, which is technical, we are very strong. Type 2 sometimes, and very rarely we really work on these functional capacities. So, the functional, and this is a bit of a mixed Spanish and English, what we call functional capacities, it's a work that was presented by the Tropical Agricultural Platform. I don't know if some of you know this strange entity created through the G20 that is based at FAO in Rome. So the capacity to manage complexity, capacity to collaborate, capacity to reflect and learn, capacity to involve oneself in political and strategic processes, lobbying and all these nice things. And all this will allow you to have the capacity to adapt and basically, how do you say, aprovechar el potencial. My English is not good. Huh? So anyway, this is the kind of thing that we spend very little time looking at, yet they are very important if you want not just having an innovation as a technical innovation, but the capacity that this innovation will actually take root in the context and become part of established practice. Now, another thing we tend to focus is mostly on individuals, yet capacity is also very much needed at an organizational level, and it's obviously very much needed at the system level. So what if you try to tackle functional capacity, you really have to try to see how you build this capacity at these various scales. And this is something that there is an EU project that is trying to, I mean, like all projects, we try to pilot these things. They work in Guatemala, Honduras, Burkina, Rwanda, Angola, Bangladesh, and Laos. So hopefully there will be interesting results. I am finishing, I think, in 6 months from now. So we will see how they were able to tackle this, and the ones in Guatemala and Honduras that are close by, maybe we can interact about this. So last point is, okay, despite having a PhD in soil fertility, I am an innovation specialist, so I want to work on innovation. I think we could maybe work together. We have started a small concept note, an idea on what we call Latin innovation in Latin America. Trying to work in different countries with the idea of building the capacity to innovate of the diversity of actors who are needed to have innovation click anywhere. It would be work that we will develop in network with people from, I didn't even put CIMIT name, I took the slide, you can see my mistake. Can I continue still? Right? Because I tried to do it on another document, but this one I didn't change. So we have CIRAD, IICA, we are trying to formalize with CATIE, with the CG, it could be CIMIT in Latin America, it could be CIP, it could be CIAT obviously. FAO, we are actually working with them at CIRAD to prepare a big innovation symposium in November, so we hope from there we will be able to continue forward. Of course, there will be national institutions and local partners, because we will try to work at the continental level, at the national level, and at a number of sites in each country. So the main idea, what would this project deliver? Well, a better capacity to promote or to develop innovation, to respond to whatever challenges there is on the table. Some diffusion or dissemination of innovation at certain scales in different sites or at national level, and some better policies for, promote? I don't like the word promote. Okay. Nurture, foster, that's the word I was looking for, foster. And we have started working in Guatemala and Mexico. We are doing some small synthesis of literature. We are about to start negotiating with some donors as soon as we have the consortium ready, and we hope with using existing projects, because this is usually a transversal dimension in many projects, that we can start implementing action. So now our components, from systematizing experiences, from developing guidelines, developing capacities, supporting some alliances or platforms or consortiums in places where they are already working, which is we will not create our own platform. We will go where actors are already trying to develop innovation, strengthening institutions and innovation systems, and having some impact on policy linked to innovation. And of course, there will be learning by doing all these nice things. I mean, it's a great idea, right? Thank you. So we want to work in many different countries. In Mexico, hopefully, and maybe with the new government working in southern Mexico would make sense. In Central America, Guatemala, we are making small progress. We were trying to focus Nicaragua, but as you know, since mid-April, Nicaragua is trying to get rid of Daniel. And in the Andean region, we have started some very small steps in Peru, maybe in Ecuador. The main point is to have countries and partners in countries that are interested and want to work with us. So here, that's okay. It's just how do we work is basically we have to find this set of partners who say we think this will add value to our work. We find sites or people in specific territories or specific value chain or specific dimensions that are already moving on innovation or want to move. And then we find a roadmap. We negotiate it that is realistic, that is adapted to the trajectory. You don't work the same in Mexico than in Guatemala, or even in southern Mexico than in central Mexico. And then from there, as soon as we have this set of partners ready to go, we can go and negotiate with donors. Calendars, that's not very important. So conclusions, you remember I had 4 messages. I didn't change them since I was here, despite playing with the system. You can read them again if you want. So complexity of impact pathways, the time it requires, and the different roles of research. These local innovators that do exist, that can be supported by the formal system rather than ignored. The idea that we need to strengthen the capacity to innovate, and this will be the key if we want to have sustained impact, because a lot of the external intervention we somehow get out of the picture of the landscape as soon as our projects are over, whereas the process has to continue, and the idea of CIMIT, hopefully some of you being interested in seeing how we can work together. Thank you. So it's a conversation. You don't have to ask me all the tough questions. You can ask the questions to yourselves, and I can be part of the conversation. But if you have specific questions on which you want me to elaborate, I can try.
Yeah, thanks, Bernard. My question is on our comparative advantage as international institution linked to the return on investment, the scaling capability on the local work. Are we the one ready to lead those type of things? We are very expensive. It's very local. That means the scalability issue is a question as well. We worked a lot with innovation approaches, and you probably know the document, but innovations approaches for research is much more learning than a scaling instrument. So what's your view on that?
I said the tough question is among our...
Well, I mean, asking to everybody, because we are changing. I mean, for us, you know, we are funded to get impact at scale. So it's a great way to learn. But it's how you scale the knowledge generated in those things, and that you give a value for the investment. I mean, we're expensive people.
It's a fair question.
Yeah.
My response on top of my head would be, impact at scale means that you have impact in local places as well. You cannot have impact if you don't have impact locally. So you have to, how do you say, to link local impact with impact at scale. The second is, we cannot stay long enough in most places to have impact, so we need to make sure that once we leave, be it after 5 years, after 10 years, these things continue, so that the impact we were hoping to create will actually happen. So we cannot save ourselves from linking to this local scale. The second is, so that's my first point. The second would be to say that local innovation is not necessarily innovation that can only work locally. That's what I said. It can be scaled. A lot of it maybe has potential. I think Robert wrote a long time ago in an article saying most of the innovation that CG centers have been working on are innovation by farmers. If you just take them, you transform them, you make them more generic. So we have to be able to look at local innovation, not for the sake of local innovation in its context of use and emergence, but in its potential for this scale that we should work at. The third part is we work with national partners. And we have a role maybe of convincing our national partners of the value of local innovation. So I think we can also share with them a message if ourselves we have, I would say, come on board with the message. If we tell them, look, don't look at local innovation because it doesn't, we somehow encourage them to ignore it. So I think that's a response in 3 different parts.
But in terms of project design, it would be quite different because your impact pathway wouldn't be a local impact pathway and would be a quite different one. I believe the same than the theory of change you have, you know, because if you put the scale issues and the return on research investment, whether your action is local or whether your action is trying to tap on local knowledges and scale it is quite different.
I think it's a difficult question, but I think we cannot avoid trying to link with it in one way or another. We have done it a lot.
Yeah, the last point is why we are usually very centric in how we place research in those impact pathways, which might be wrong as well.
What do you mean by that? Well, all those impact pathways are made for projects.
And projects have a beginning and end, and research is in the center of those impact pathways. Sometimes we would need to take ourselves our boundary partners, not our central partners to development. And I think we would see the impact pathway in a very different fashion.
The impact pathway I presented was not a project, which was over more or less 25 years. It was many different, and it was not just research, even though our focus as a research institution were to see where we had participated, but a lot of even the outputs and certainly the outcomes in the impact pathway are things that are multi-stakeholder by nature. Which is, it is not research that is necessarily controlling. And I said, depending on the modes, right? The 4 different modes, it's not necessarily research that is the one playing a central role, and the function as well that I mentioned is not necessarily just function for research. So let's also remember that.
But part of that could also be stepping out of the comfort zone and then trying to put the local environment as the center of the impact pathway. And if we did that, it would be much more difficult for international research, for example, because it would be a more difficult situation, so we are much more comfortable staying in that one where we do it ourselves. And at the same time, that would be really, you could say, the test, the litmus.
That's a different, I mean, that's the, again, I'm talking maybe too much, but that's the question of the comparative advantage. Are we designed for that role? Should we be restructuring for that role? That's all the questions. What's the return on investment? Are there any other actors in the landscapes that would do a much better job than we do on that local scene? Understanding local, I mean, scales are important. You know, acting locally is very important. Understanding the heterogeneity and the realities at local scale is very important. But sometimes I don't think we have a comparative advantage to go much deeper at the local level without thinking about scaling at the wider, you know, on a wider scale. Because it's very expensive.
I totally agree that this is exactly the nutshell of where the tension is. And we tend to go back in our comfort zone and say, oh, but our comparative advantage is not this. Yet, more and more, all evidence shows the importance of being mindful of contexts, both not only technical or agroecological, also institutional and socially, to make these things be sustainable movement in the right. Yes, we've known that, but why is it we keep saying, oh, but it's not our comparative advantage, and therefore we will not address it? So we keep saying the question, but we never want to discuss it and find a solution or find out what or where is it that we could begin to change the way we see ourselves.
We have a much larger comparative advantage. So that's the partnership issue. We are not doing everything ourselves.
But we're doing...
Articulate your work and the knowledge you generate with your research for other actors in development.
Yeah, that's another way of articulating the reason for why we should stay in the comfort zone.
It's not a comfort zone, I don't think so.
But I think nobody says we have to do everything.
Yeah, exactly. We don't have to do everything, and we don't have to go local on everything. There are things where it makes more sense to stay higher up than at other things. But to never address this and always shy away from it immediately by saying, oh, that's not our, and therefore we won't do, that's also, we're losing out on things. We're not necessarily finding out a lot of things by not even looking into it.
Well, but we can on the other hand just generate anecdotal stories that are not.
No. That's another way of dismissing the local by saying, oh, those are just little anecdotal stories. But you can make local things different places and do it in a way that you can still be comparative and you can still look at patterns. But you can also choose to then say, oh no, that's an anecdote and therefore it doesn't count.
I think there is a lot of things that is in local innovation dynamics that are generic in nature. If we take the time to understand them and to see what can be learned from it, that can be used in many other contexts. If we don't do this work, which is if we don't systematize it with this view of producing public good that has a generic value, of course, the argument can be made that this is not necessarily our role, but I think really we have invested in these systems in the name of some of the arguments. Now we say we are expensive, we make ourselves expensive and we put ourselves at the higher end of the research, how do you say, pipe. And we say this is where we should be, but I think it's decisions that can be made. And the point is not to invest everything in local innovation, it's to say part of our resources could be invested there with profit for our mission. Again, with profit for our mission. The part, is it 10%, is it 20%, is it, depending on the context, it can be discussed, but having close to zero is probably not a safe investment bank. That would be my continued answer to you, continued persistency.
Yeah, maybe if I could have I think this lovely discussion has put me at risk of missing the whole point. So I want to see if you could help me feel like I've gotten the point, because by your definition, it sounds to me, and I would agree, all innovation is local. In fact, all innovation is individual. It's not innovation until somebody adopts it and somebody then adapts it to their uses. So otherwise it's just a technology. It's not an innovation because it didn't get used. So given that all innovation is local, all we can do is offer options and make sure that those options that the capacity exists to accept and innovate with those options. So I'm not really sure what you're proposing to do as an innovation expert, and what's new here. I don't see it yet, sorry.
You guys are tough, huh? And you don't come to CIMIT and expect that they will agree with the local innovation agenda. But I think, yes.
Now we agree that whether we should be deeply involved in it.
Which is, I think, do we agree that at the end things will be meaningful if they are adopted or if there is impact? Okay. So if we agree that this is our target, our goal, if we don't have impact, or if we have only project impact, which by the way is not impact, because as we have, I mean, I don't know if you have seen many of these curves of adoption project stops and adoption curves that go immediately down because there is no the support structure, not the oil in the machinery. So if we think that this is our mission, we say, okay, we have to be in a place, and when we leave, the process will continue, right? Because it will take much longer than we can afford to do because of the way funding for research goes. So we want innovation to take root in this local context, everywhere that we will, because we cannot just say that we stay, we live, and if it doesn't happen, we are still happy because we can still sell products. So if it doesn't take root, we haven't done our job. So the main point that we have to do is make sure it can take root. Leadership, is it necessary? Do we need to change institutions because of the, say, agroecology? You want to be part of the landscape in this territory, and people are relying on inputs more than on ecology to get their production out. So my recommendation is just we need to do this work. It's not new. I mean, I think if you read the Dos Mazorcas de Maíz, which was written back in the 1980s, a lot of these things that have been written by people from NGOs a long time ago. What they hadn't done maybe at this time is factor in what is the role of research in promoting local development. So I'm not sure it's new, maybe you're right, but we haven't yet done it, or we haven't convinced some of our research partners to do it. Because for me, research is not us, the CP centers, or the international institution, is research in its different definition. So I'm not sure it's new, but if we keep avoiding the topic, it will keep being new to say that we have to do it. I haven't answered properly, I'm sorry.
You've answered, actually, I think, quite nicely in that sense. If it's not being taken up, well...
It's still an innovation.
Yeah, but then what is it, no? Is it, do we need to change something for it to be taken up, or is it something we haven't understood?
Is that, well, for me, following the point of Bruno, I think that this institution started with a different paradigm of innovation. And in some way or another, trying to move from that paradigm is quite hard. Because that idea that innovation have to be exogenous is very into our heart and the whole story of the institution. The other element that is part of the storyline of the institution is that it makes this impact at scale, no? Green Revolution, Norman Borlaug, all these discourses that shape what CIMIT is now and the way that we sell ourselves into the world. So trying to bring this idea of locality, indigenous development, for me, that I have been trying. For instance, we tried to do some exercises in in Guatemala and in Yucatan, trying to document local innovations, following a little bit the methodology of Prolinova, and that's why I'm in contact with Gabriela Quiroga. And it was trying to get a counter-argument. It was trying to get into the contra-logic of the whole institution, because we are very used to arrive and say, come on, I have here a portfolio of options, so what do you select? What do you pick up? But I think that it's a narrative that it's from our perspective, because when you start documenting from the other's perspective, from our collaborators' perspective, and I would even dare to say that all these things about the discussion at scale, it's not real. We're having local collaborators now. We're working at local scale now. So we are having influence at local scale, and when we come and listen the story from the collaborators, there's a lot of co-innovation. There's a lot that is bringing up from what they are doing, and that we are trying to have like more a spirit effect, no? But it's the narrative in which we feel comfortable, in which the institution have been finding a way of living. What I'm wondering is if we were really willing to listen those evidence that are already happening. For me, it's only changing the perspective and being able to say, well, let's start recognizing that when I arrived with conservation agriculture in Oaxaca, they reinvented totally, no? And what they report for conservation agriculture will be even perhaps middle of one of the principles of that. So there's a lot of negotiation and readaptation and reinterpretation of what people is doing in the field. And we are learning a lot of them, but perhaps, yes, it's more comfortable to continue with our dominant narrative that we are arriving with new ideas and having impact at scale. It was not a question, sorry.
I didn't take it as one.
I have a complicated one and an easy one. Which one do you want? You want both. Okay, so you talk about local innovation, right? Singular, right? But, I mean, if you really want to achieve something, probably you have maybe a local innovation, maybe a new seed or a way of doing a tractor. But eventually, to get this started, you need innovations in other sectors, right? I mean, in distribution and all those kind of things. Do you see in finance, all these other sectors, you see it very strongly in scaling, but actually also in innovation, it's the same, right? But we keep talking about an innovation and have a pathway for that innovation. Do you recognize that point, or would you challenge that? And the second point is because... The easy one? No, that was the complicated one. Yeah. The easy one is coming now. You talked about capacity to collaborate. And this is a hot topic now for CIMIT, because trying to get our head around it. Can you say, from your perspective and your experience, what you mean with that, or what is behind that? Capacity to collaborate.
And that was the easy one.
That was the easy one.
So
for me to formulate, for you to answer is another one.
The first one, indeed, I use local innovation without an S to refer more to the overall process that is behind these things, and not the specific innovation that can come out of the process. Right? Now, an easy way out of your tricky question would be to say, since we haven't studied it, I can't really tell you what is happening with these other dimensions, because which is a good and a bad answer. The second one would be that indeed a lot of what, as I said in some of the challenges, a lot of the innovation we have been able to document are things that are extremely local and extremely production oriented. So you don't need a big reaccommodation of the system or the networks around this innovation, because it happens on a scale where basically if your family is okay with you, if your neighbor is okay with you, you can make these things work for you in this local context. If you want to take them to a certain scale, then you need a support system. And this support system can either rearrange itself organically in response to this new thing that is in the, or it can be reorganized with some more explicit willingness, political willingness, resources. For example, for Innova, since you mentioned Carolina, have developed schemes for funding local innovation, having a screening process where people can apply to these funds for innovation, have to show how they meet certain criteria of reproducibility, sustainability, low cost, what would be the target. So if you start formalizing, you will enter into this kind of complexities. But the ones that happen, like these women in Benin, developing their whole network, I don't know how it all worked. We can say it happened, we see it happening, we see the product, we see these people, like the providers, right? You need soybean as your produce for doing this food. So the system has been created somehow, the support system.
Yeah, that's a little bit what I mean, because if you say then local innovation, what you're saying is actually not so very complex, because you need only one thing to be innovated, right? But even in, I think, the soya thing, when they start selling it and processing, they have a lot of new things that they need to learn and processes new things, distribution channel all the way to Cotonou, etc., right? These are also innovations. But what I see in our literature, and probably also in your literature, it focuses on the soya and don't divert a lot from the great innovations that are actually accompanying it, right?
Well, that's one of the things, if you decide to join us in this Latino, we want to make sure that when we look at this, we look at these different dimensions.
Yeah.
Right now we are trying to do, as I said, a review of literature. A lot of these things are never described even in the formal institutions. They just happen somehow.
Exactly.
And if it is successful, we know they have happened in the right way. And if it is not successful, which by the way so many people don't want to report about, then we know that they have been somewhere lacking, or there have been these things that have not been attended.
Exactly.
Your second question?
Capacity to collaborate.
Yeah. What do I mean by that?
Yeah.
From the first one would be simply to, I would say, to know who you need to collaborate with, which is by itself already a big question. Because you have many people out there and you can choose to go with some partners or some others. No? The second is how to negotiate a common interest, like innovation platforms, which has been fashion for the last 10 years or 15 years maybe. What is common? We have done it in Burkina Faso around promoting conservation agriculture. But a lot of the people who want to come on board, their interest is not conservation agriculture. They want to collaborate with you. They have a bigger development agenda, or maybe some I would say specific problems they want to solve. So how you negotiate a common agenda that is meaningful for the actors that you have identified, or they have identified you, because sometimes it can go the other way. People come and demand, they say, please come help us, right? We have a problem. And that's a second issue. I think the other one is a big one that we have seen. And 2 weeks ago I was doing some interviews with people from Colpos. And they say, research, well, I don't know if they have research like Colpos, they have teachers, faculty. The guy who I interviewed say 80% of them have no interest in working outside of Colpos with actors, because the system of rewards in the institution doesn't, I mean, they are in the comfort zone, they have a salary if they are part of SNI 1, you know SNI, the system here where you get some, they are in SNI 1, their income is fine, and their life is not complex. If you want to go into partnership, you enter into all kinds of rules where you need rules of engagement that are different from the rules of engagement within your own institution. It can resonate with some people to work outside, it can resonate less with other people. So it's not necessarily also something that everybody will do. Then you have all these attributes, being able to listen. I was once in the field, I was once in the field in Honduras with a professor from North Carolina, who was trying to negotiate with farmers a protocol for measuring, what was it? That we were measuring hydraulic conductivity. The guy just doesn't know how to talk to a farmer. The guy was dying in his hammock. The guy was telling him about technical jargon about hydraulic conductivity. If you don't know how to engage, that's not the institutional level. You cannot have meaningful partnership. People have to understand each other. So there are all these different things that we can, it's a long list. So.
I would like to just go back to the previous point, that one about the whole systemic thing about the finance and the other things and whatnot, and give an example from Genovate, in which we are working with the notion of opportunity structure, local opportunity structure. So what does the local environment, the local context, provide in terms of opportunities, and also who can access those opportunities? So that has a lot of bearing on the kind of innovation processes that can take place, and for us, most importantly, who can participate in them. And that's what I mean, a little bit back to Kevin's concern about, that's where, if we do not concern ourselves with understanding context, we will miss out on understanding why some things take up or only benefit certain parties, and elsewhere it's different. And so, I mean, again, just opening up that one about understanding the local context, and we use that opportunity structure for that, yeah. And to Bruno's point there, when that's a comparative study in 137 communities in 26 countries, so you can say something across scale.
No, I just want to make two comments. I think to your, it's not because the context is local that the learning is local and that you cannot see processes out of that. Otherwise, there wouldn't be processes going on globally on marketing and stuff like that, which is all context specific, but still it provokes similar issues. So I think we need to get a little bit out of that polarized, because it isn't as polarized as it may look like. And on the other hand, I think we sometimes miss out, and I see the same thing with innovation. For a while, it was with collaboration. No? Collaboration was automatically good. More, the better, the bigger, and I think we need to be way more transparent and honest and say collaboration comes with the transaction costs, with maybe you either overcome it by the collaboration, or you better do it on your own if the cost of collaborating is not overcoming the benefit that comes out of it. And I think we need to be very straightforward about that, because otherwise it bites you it bites you back afterwards. And with innovation, it's a little bit, I find the same kind of, if we are drumming this like innovation is always good. Well, maybe it also comes with a huge opportunity cost. It comes with cost of transaction. It comes with many costs. So I think to start with, as innovation lovers, almost giving the title, we should also be very straightforward about that, very transparent, and say this is the cost that brings to individuals, to institutions, and then how do you generate innovation, obviously minimizing those costs and maximizing the outcome by local contexts, etc.
I would completely agree with you that we have a tendency not to talk enough about not the hidden cost, the actual cost of the innovation.
No, I'm not even talking about hidden.
Yet the complexity of the innovation challenges we face in general make for looking for, because say I'm a soil fertility guy, which is not completely wrong. If I want to go into local networks of people, even family lineage in a country like Madagascar, it's very complex. For an agronomist, it's impossible to decipher. Yet if I want my innovation, say my technical innovation about a new variety or a new cropping system, if I don't know how to decipher some of these things, it will not go anywhere. So I need to align myself with people who have the skills, and the skills are not necessarily academic. They can be skills like people who are in communities who know where these networks are. So the point is, we need somewhere to be aware that collaboration is a requirement for our goal. Now, collaboration cannot be just everybody is fair, everybody is nice, everybody will play the game with me. So we have to avoid the simplicity of saying I can do without. I just go with my quotas, right? We have a nice cellas and we decide how we want to do things. And we might miss completely what we would need if it's not just a question of short-term activities, but this longer-term sustained dynamics that we hope we will, we will create, or we will nurture, or we will strengthen. So you're right, but I think we have to be prepared for collaboration in most everything we do.
saying we're not. Okay, I think we are already 10 minutes over time, so in respect of everybody's time, thank you very much for the excellent Brown Bag seminar. Happy to see you back after, what was it, more than 15 years? And we accept the challenge to collaborate.
On local innovation, we will change the paradigm. Let's go! Thank you so much. See?